Do you think the art produced at any time is a good indication of the general spiritual qualities of an age?
Age in which sense?
When let's say, if the music is ugly today, are we living in an ugly age? If it was a nostalgic Chopin nocturne, was this a different kind of atmosphere that could have produced it? We know that Janacek came out of the Czech soil, of the Moravian soil, and it was a beautiful.
I really don't think so. I don't think that the real music has any much to do with in which surroundings or in which age we live. What eventually has an influence, like when you mentioned Janacek, it was a tremendous uplift to him when the Czechoslovakia became independent, and he suddenly, as he was a great nationalist, and he suddenly felt this new, strength and impulse to write in this very wonderful spirit of free land. Freedom. So that I believe that yes, Chopin, I think the fact that he was not living in his native land but in France had a certain nostalgia and certain melancholy, about his land, which brought this certain quality in his composition. From other Czech composer Martinu, who practically lived all his life outside of Czechoslovakia, he wrote really more Czech music than many composers living in Czechoslovakia. I also don't think that you can really call any music ugly. Even if it seems ugly to you, it is not ugly, and I don't think that it represents exactly the age we are living. Yes. I know some. I won't say the names, but I know some pieces which really eventually could be called in a way ugly. But they were not composed today. They were composed in relatively peaceful and normal times.
What are those pieces?
Well, I don't want to say the names.
Okay. Now, certainly to me, there's certain aspects even in Beethoven that are ugly, such as the Fugue of the Hammerklavier and the Opus 101.
Or the Große Fuge.
Yes.
I mean, Große Fuge, which is an enormous piece, but you can't exactly call it beautiful.
Exactly.
And the Hammerklavier Fuga from the Opus 106, which is monumental, but it's not exactly the beautiful music. But
yes.
So I think it's very large.
It's a large topic. Delacroix said,
as I said before, I don't think there is anything but ugly music in a way. I think every music has some kind of beauty in it.
And really, every kind. Are you speaking also of lower music, of rock music?
Yes, I think that for instance the popular music, I am not terribly good to discuss the rock music because I know nothing about it. But I was still able to hear what we call the period of Gershwin and Rogers and these composers, and of course in Europe. And I must say that was perfectly good music. It was nothing basically wrong with it. Exactly. I mean, it wasn't Beethoven, it wasn't Mozart, but it was good music. As I said, and the jazz was, of course, a tremendous influence for everybody, for the greatest composer of our
You yourself may have had a little influence of jazz. I mean, Martinu did it a little bit.
Definitely, because it didn't come so. It came rather late to Czechoslovakia. It hit first France after the war, and France was really the most influenced by jazz. Ravel, Milhaud, and Honegger, you name it. Czechoslovakia was a little bit later, and then the jazz became very popular too.
Yes, perfect. This is it. This is exactly what I want.
Yeah.
Do you find that many of your colleagues and your friends are, well, let's say that art has become a commodity right now? Miro said recently when he burned a group of paintings, he did it because as a symbol that paintings are not dollars. I find that people don't talk of art anymore with the same kind of spiritual feeling, that it's almost an embarrassment to speak tenderly of what art can be to you. It's become so much a commodity. It's a therapy. In the 19th century, it was a way of life. What do you say about that?
Well, it's partly, I think, due to the superproduction. It's in every field, actually, not only in musical field, but in the older days, as much as I can say, there was much less, really much less going on than it's going now. There were not so many artists, not so many composers, not so many anything, and I think this, in a way, is responsible that it's becoming a little bit more, I wouldn't like to say the word profane, but I mean, it doesn't have this feeling of something very special. And don't forget one thing which I think also very important, and for instance, even in my youth, and that's, unfortunately I'm not young, but I'm again not that old, we didn't have any recordings, we didn't have any radios. For us, the only possibility to hear music was to go to the concert or to do it yourself. So the concert became a kind of tremendous important affair, and it was almost like a holiday, when we were looking forward to hear the next Sunday the Beethoven Sixth Symphony Pastoral or whatever you name it. We were living practically in anticipation the whole week for this great event to hear it. Well, nowadays, you go in the elevator, you go there, you hear the Fifth Symphony by Beethoven all the time. It somehow is losing the meaning of its uniqueness, which in a way should have been left really for the concert halls and for the people who are coming there to hear the piece and really appreciate it.
So, in a sense, the great movement toward marketing in this century
I think this is the answer. I think this is the answer, yes.
So we can hear right on this station all the 9 symphonies in one day, but they're surrounded by commercials and messages and jingles, and
right.
They lose their...
I mean, the music, of course, is the same, but it is losing the momentum in a way, And the same goes in a way for the recordings. I think that in the older days, when the people didn't have that much opportunity to record, there were not many artists who would, for instance, say, I record all Beethoven sonatas, all Chopin works, all Mendelssohn, all Schumann, which is very all right. But I mean, sometimes before you felt you had to have certain affinity to do something, and you said, maybe I can play this, but I can't play so well, so you took the very strict criterion. But nowadays it's becoming marketing, They say, if you want to make a business, you have to do everything,
Do it all, because
it can be done because we have very, very able and capable people to do it. I mean, there's God knows nothing against the people who do it, but it can be done. It was not done before.
Yeah,
so much.
The marketing is so amazing. They say, well, 3 Beethoven sonatas, learn all of them now, because we can't sell only 3, we want all.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. Now, let's move then towards, in a sense, another aspect of packaging. Speaking of art schools once, Clive Bell wrote, he was an art critic, but he writes on art schools. I just want you to discuss what you think of this. Art schools do nothing but harm. They're a little different than music schools, but the principle is here. In schools, there must be a criterion of excellence, and that criterion cannot be an artistic one. No master can make a student into an artist, but he can, and most do, turn into imposters, maniacs, criminals, or just cretins, the unfortunate boys and girls who had been made artists by nature. It is not the master's fault, and he ought not to be blamed. He is there to bring all his pupils to a certain standard of efficiency appreciable by the inspectors and by the general public. And certainly schools and competitions now have that element to such a degree.
Yes, exactly.
Well, you're a teacher,
yes,
and you have taught your whole life. You certainly know that nobody will get the training Janacek gave you, because he was individual. Even he, living into this century as long as he did, knew that you had better go and do it the established way.
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I agree in a way, that it's you can be just the guidance. That's all. You can guide, but you are not trying to produce a Pygmalion, you know, I mean, to make overnight. First of all, I think I don't have too much experience in teaching, actually. I mean, I was teaching, but it's not really my predominant occupation. But I always, since the beginning, I always tried very much to be able to let them develop their own personality, even if it doesn't always agree with my ideas, unless it's basically wrong, you know. I think it's much better than they are thinking of it themselves than just to say, look, this is wrong and this is right, you know. That doesn't exist in music, you know.
At Juilliard, you have a very high standard, no doubt, in your class.
They are practically all finished products, so I mean, this is, I would say, much more coaching and discussion than actual teaching.
Yes.
Because also due to nevertheless, to my frequent absences, I can't have somebody who would need a steady control. And if somebody starts to study seriously an instrument, he has to be under certain control. Exactly as an orchestra has to have a one conductor, you know, who is there for a certain length of time to bring it really together.
How is it that someone can take a phrase and make that phrase or section sound lighthearted, while another can turn it into a heartbreaking moment? This can be. We are so used to thinking that the music dictates the whole, and yet this negates the whole idea of the performing art, because we know that the score is just a very, it's sacred, but I think we're sometimes too servile to the composer, because I have heard you play things, a Schubert sonata, that has nothing to do with the way anyone else does it. And yet it's Schubert.
Well, I think that I can repeat you one very interesting thing which happened to me. When the first time I played with Bruno Walter, it was a Beethoven C minor concerto, and we met again before the concert to discuss it. And I was considerably younger, of course, than at this time. And so we were somehow discussing a little bit, you know, the approach to the great work of music. And he told me, did you read the Brother Karamazov by Dostoevsky? I say, yes, I did read Brother Karamazov. He said, do you remember one special episode in this particular book? I said, which one? He said, well, when Misha is driving his sled, you know, in the winter, and says, now I am driving. And that should be in the music, he told me. You know, when you come to play, you respect the composer as much as you can, but you are driving, you know, you are, and I think that goes for interpretation in general. Otherwise, I mean, it would be very dull. You know, if everybody would play, no matter how magnificently, how beautifully, but in exactly the same way, it would be very dull. Yes. The music lives by its performance.
Yes.
Not by recording, because that's always the same, no matter how wonderful it is, but it doesn't change. It stays here, and thanks God for it, but it is here. But the performance is changing. Sometimes better, sometimes not so good, but that's a privilege of human nature, but it lives. And the music must live, you know, to really to give the message to the people which we are trying to do. And I think in a way that every interpreter has the full right, unless he does something which is absolutely opposite to the intentions of composer. If he changes the tempis or dynamics to such an extent, well, then you can start to discuss. But otherwise, I don't think there is a established law. I remember myself playing some of the contemporary composers, so then I have a possibility to discuss the interpretation with them and to come to some idea what they had in mind. Janacek, for instance. Well, Janacek's one piece, I think we had 3 or 4 different ideas. One day he liked it this way, the next day said, no, I think I would like it this way. The third time,
his own music,
you know, which again prove that it is not exactly so much in. I think the moment they finish a music, they are not so much interested in it. They already think of the next one which they are writing, and they may eventually learn something from the performance because they may arrange it, like Martinu, for instance. Sometimes he changed a little bit after he heard it. But they don't have this, they are not clinging so much, to the written note as we think they are. Or one of my teachers for composition later was also Mr. Suk, the Czech composer.
Wonderful composer.
Very good composer.
Good.
And he was also beside the member of the very famous string quartet in Bohemia called Bohemian String Quartet, which established great reputation in Europe. And he told me that they played Brahms quartets, and as Suk married the Dvořák's daughter,
yes.
who unfortunately died very young in the childbirth.
Yes.
Dvořák and Brahms were friendly. They were good friends. So Suk asked Dvořák if they could play the quartet to Brahms. Yes. So they went to play the quartet for Brahms, his own quartet. And he told me that we were on, of course, shaking, very nervous. But it was at the beginning, when we were prepared to play Brahms, there was a schon zu schnell, already too fast, which broke somehow the spell, and they started to play. And then they asked him, any suggestions, anything what you would say? See, no, my dear, just play beautifully. So that shows, that the composer sometimes is not so terribly. Maybe Stravinsky was, I don't know.
Yes, I understand.
Stravinsky maybe was extremely
meticulous,
demanding in a way that nothing should be added from the interpreter because he wanted to have his work photographically reproduced, yes. Which is all right. I think it's
can't be done anyway, but
it has everybody has this right. But sometimes I think it's the composer is the first one who says, "Look, if you have the feeling that it helps the thing, do it."
Yes. Well, this is important for interpreters because they become so servile and that they become paralyzed by what they think that the composer wants.
Well, before we can only discuss it from the point of view of reading about in the books, that you practically every so-called interpret or virtuoso or artist, performing artist, or he was composed himself. Mozart, Chopin,
sure.
Liszt, Beethoven to a certain degree. So, they played predominantly their own music.
Sure.
So what they did with it, nobody knows, unfortunately. Yes. I wish we could hear Mozart playing his piano music, his concerto. Now, Liszt, who became the first so-called great piano virtuoso, what he mostly played was transcriptions of the great works, Beethoven, Berlioz, and you name it, Schubert, but nevertheless played it his own way.
Yes.
He played very few things in the original. He did.
Sure.
He's playing more than the people realize. But basically, it was his interpretation.
Those first years, especially.
Yes, and he was, of course, such a tremendous personality that he probably couldn't help it.
Yeah.
Even Chopin was criticizing him sometimes because he said he can't just leave anything alone by itself. He has always to do something. And it goes on. The Bach probably did the same.
Sure.
So I think the interpretation was always subject to a certain, I would say, improvisation and certain feeling of spell of the moment,
Yes. Now, that's the way a composer is part of this situation. Before we were discussing the fact that you did the premiere, I believe, of the Hansen Piano Concerto.
Yes,
and here's an example of the composer as conductor who didn't give as fine a performance as when you later did it with Stokowski.
That's correct, yes. Stokowski really brought some kind of life to the piece which Hansen didn't. It was all very, very wonderful, and of course, exactly in the composer's intentions, because he was conducting himself and we played it together. But Stokowski took it from the point of view of interpretation. But the same more or less was with with Menotti piano concerto, which I also premiered first in Boston, and then later I played it also with Stokowski. And once I played with Cantelli, the brilliant conductor who unfortunately died. And Giancarlo told me the Cantelli performance was really the performance, Although he was present to all three when we played it. So he was there, he was present, and he was able to give his idea. And still, sometimes, something happens which didn't happen before.
This is marvelous. You have championed Martinu to a great extent. Even in one of your last recitals, you played this massive work. What was it?
Fantasy Toccata, yes.
Fantasy Toccata. The way you played it now, I said, my goodness, this is a masterpiece.
It is a good piece, yes.
Why is this composer not quite given the ranking of the top?
That is an interesting question. I personally, of course, I like Martinu very much because he was a very dear friend of mine, and I knew him intimately, and we were living next to each other in New York for many years, and practically every piano music which he wrote more or less for me in a way.
Sure.
And he was a wonderful composer, there is no doubt, in every way. He wrote beautiful operas, he wrote beautiful chamber music,
symphonies, concertos.
If I may be in a way critical, maybe he wrote too much. And there is a tremendous number of compositions which he left us. And maybe not all of them are on the same caliber, although they are always beautifully done from the point of view of craftsmanship. But there are so many which are really important that it's surprising that suddenly he is not played. But the one consolation is he's not the only one.
Yes.
Let's take, for instance, the case of Mio, Honegger, Hindemith. These composers who were very popular at the time. I mean, you heard
Ernst Bloch.
You don't hear them so much. I think that the time is changing. At the time, I'm sure will come again when we will come back to this today little bit neglected composers.
Yes.
Because it will be necessary, because all the other music will be so much played that there will be need for something different. But this is also maybe it was that when he was living, Martinu, he wrote a great deal because he got commissions and all kind of things. And it was performed right away. Now, of course, since he's gone, the people say, well, if we do something, we have to do something more actual, more contemporary, more up to date, or so.
Well, it's a wonderful body of music, no doubt about it. I would like you to say a little bit about the style, the keyboard style, piano writing of Janacek. It's so unusual.
Yeah, well, it's actually not so very unusual. It's very normal writing. He was quite a good pianist himself. He was never performing very much as a pianist, but he played quite well. And he was a good organist. That was really his instrument, was organ. He didn't write in the virtuoso style. He didn't write in a style of great virtuoso writing. It's relatively simple writing, and it's very much the writing of his works for in his operas. Of course, much simpler because they were early works. No, I don't think there's anything very, very special.
The sonata seems so clumsy.
Well, it's.
I love it though.
Yes, it's clumsy in a way because he was not thinking of the instrument so much. He wanted to express the feeling which inspired to write this work. And this is, you mentioned the sonata, it's interesting because the sonata was written in 1905 And the reason for it was, this manifestation.
Yes.
You know the
Prague
story.
University.
Brno, because the Prague had a Czech university, but not Brno.
I see.
And then Austrians sent the troops.
Yes.
But anyway, he was, as I told you before, he was a very nationalistic man. He was very strongly Czech feeling and didn't like anything but was German. Brno was predominantly German town at this time because the majority of the population was German. So he was so shaken by these two things. Number one, the simple man who wanted to manifest for the higher teaching was killed, unnecessarily. And so he wrote this piece. And one of my teachers, as a matter of fact, the first teacher which Janacek recommended was a lady who copied the sonata, so that how we had it, because he destroyed it completely.
Yes.
And she copied only two movements because the third she hadn't time to copy. And she performed it for the first time. In the small, it was not a big concert, it was a concert in the school of which he was a director. It was called Organ School of Music in Brno, which later became Conservatory. And at the same program was the works by Novak,
Yes.
who was another Czech composer, very Prague composer, at this time extremely popular,
Yes.
much more popular than Janacek,
Sure.
and much more celebrated than Janacek. And he wrote in very lush piano style.
Wagner on the piano.
Schumann, very, very lush, and very pianistic, but
Yes.
very lush. And Suk wrote at this time a suite which was a little bit less maybe pianistic than Novak, but still very much like Brahms, and Janacek wrote this sonata, which when he heard this concert, he suddenly realized that this is such a bad piano writing, probably compared to this established, which was ridiculous because that's what makes it so great. So that was the reason he destroyed it.
And the two movements were saved,
Yeah,
though.
the two movements saved because the lady copied it.
What?
But before he wrote, later he wrote these small pieces called Organal Pass, which is strangely enough some of them wrote for harmonium, not even
Yes.
for piano. And these are really very simple in a way. They are
Yes.
only difficult and complicated by its context, but not by the writing. And then he wrote In the Mist, which some people
Lovely.
say that it's a little bit impressionistic, which is wrong. I don't think it's impressionistic at all. But that I would say is the most pianistic work of Janacek in a way of using the piano. And the Capriccio, of course, is left hand. That's very special. And the Concertino is not at all brilliant piece. It's rather, that was his style. No, he was, but it's not. I think it's really Janacek's style. No,
Yes.
he had to write it this way.
Now, let's talk about your two piano teachers in your career. Willem Kurz.
Kurz, yes.
He was very famous as a piano teacher in.
He was considered the greatest piano teacher at this time in Czechoslovakia. He was first teaching in Lvov, which at this time was part of Austria too. Now it is, of course, part of Soviet Union. And there he was spending several years and established somehow his great reputation as a very fine teacher. And also he was close, to Polish tradition, and so that it was very helpful for him to understand Chopin and all these things. And some of his students from this time became quite famous, like Steuermann, who was later active here and who became, of course, great exponent of Schoenberg. Roginski was studying with him there still, and some other, and his daughter, who was a fine pianist herself. So he somehow came to Brno with a great reputation as a great pedagogue, great teacher. And the lady I started on recommendation of Mr. Janacek to study, Miss Tuchkova was her name. She took the leave of absence because she was actually more harpist than pianist. She was quite a good harpist, but not such a great pianist. But she taught piano. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to lose the year, to waiting for her. So I thought, Janacek, I would like to go to Kurz. Mm-hmm. I was 7 years, I don't know.
7 or 8?
7, I guess.
Mm.
And
you knew what you wanted, always.
Always, yes. And Janacek told me, look, I don't think it would be such a good idea to go to course now, because you should go to his wife, who was also a very fine piano teacher, who did exactly the same thing which her husband taught. Because I think the child is better to be with a woman who has somehow more feeling and understanding than the man. And God knows he was very right, because Kurz, who was teaching me actually from the beginning, because I took the lesson with his wife, but he was always supervising. So I was actually working with both of them, but only later I became 100% student of course. He was a very difficult man, and very demanding, very good professor, very excellent, but sometimes not so helpful for the, psychologically.
Psychologically.
So I think it was again one of these wonderful advice of Janacek, who that shows you how much he understood the children's mentality, and what the child needs and what this. And so actually I started with Mrs. Kurz, who gave me the very, very good teaching. As I said, Kurz was always there, always around. I mean, I saw him practically every week. He came to supervise, and when I had to play then later publicly, he always was the last instance, to come.
Did he encourage you, though?
As long as I was studying with his wife, he was wonderful. He was, because probably he didn't want to embarrass his wife in a way, and he was. Also, I was very young, but then later he was not so good in a way. I mean, he was very fond of me, and he taught me with the greatest affection, and he was very proud of me and everything. But he couldn't somehow take my decision that I want still to go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. He wanted I'm exclusively his product, and I had a feeling that there were limitations. I mean, he was very good for the general thing, how to play piano. He was a good musician and everything, which the revision of the Vrak concerto proves. I mean, he did a very good job. But I didn't have the feeling I have still to see more. I still have to find more.
Some elements were missing.
So, and that was our first conflict, because he somehow didn't like it at all.
How old?
Well, I was already finished with the conservatoire. I finished the studies, it was 18, 19.
So you were with him and
until the end, yes.
A long time.
A long time, yes. And that was the first somehow conflict. But then I succeeded, and I went to France, and I went then later to Schnabel, and then we didn't. I went again back to him for a show, but then we started to have already a little bit differences in general, because I started to develop my own personality, which he couldn't accept in a way. He was still too much professor, It had to be done this way, and that is the only way, and unless it's this way, it's no good. And that I couldn't very well take. So then finally we parted.
He wouldn't let you fly away?
No. And that was the reason. But we were on friendly terms until the end, and he was...
Was Schnabel a different experience?
Completely different, yes. Well,
Tell me.
Schnabel was completely different. When Schnabel was number one, I must say, when I came to Schnabel, I was so-called ready product, so we didn't go into any basic things. And it was just really the discussion and of music. And it was completely different approach, The Kurz was a technical approach, and he wanted, and that he must say it very well, he wanted to teach you how to play piano.
And
which
he did.
Is very important,
Yes.
For everybody. He was interested how you look at the music and how you make music. And so it was a wonderful, new, how do you say, possibility for me to think differently,
He opened up your musical
the
reservoirs.
The new approach, which I may not always be d'accord. I mean, I don't need always to agree with everything what he said, but I mean, it gave you a great possibility to start to think in a different way of how to play piano than what I did before. So it was completely different. He never spoke about technique. I mean, in my case, I don't know how it was before.
You played and he talked about it, or
yes, I played and
it was mostly
then we did analyze it and discussed it. And
did he ever play his own compositions to you?
No.
Did you ever play yours to him?
No.
When did was composing always alongside, and then?
Well, the composing was, I actually wanted to study composition very seriously. That was my idea. But the piano became most important instrument, and as I was extremely busy with my studies because I had to go to schools, and I had to study everything at the same time. So I really had very little time. I hardly had sometimes time to practice piano because the day was rather short. And then when I went to conservatory for composition, and which I started to continue there, then I started to be busy with my concert. That means I had to study repertoire, I had to study the new pieces. And I still believe that to be a composer, it requires the same kind of discipline as to be a pianist. And you have to write a lot.
Yeah.
To be able to finally create something which you can say, well, this is my own. So it unfortunately became more a hobby than the profession, which I'm sorry, but that's how it is. And now I don't have inspiration because the music, what today, I really don't have too much affinity. I am not against it by all means. I admire it as a matter of fact, but I don't feel it. And to write away in old way, it's... And then also one thing, the Janacek was wonderful teacher in many ways because he was, as I said before, absolutely unorthodox. But you can't imitate Janacek. There is not one student of his, and he got quite a number who became quite well-known composers later, and especially in Brno, in Mani. Not a single one. Novak, on the other hand, in Prague, who was considered the great compositions teacher in Prague, he had a tremendous number of very talented composers who were influenced very much by him, and then developed differently. But Janacek,
no, too individualistic.
Too individualistic. So I think that was also partly the thing that, I had a feeling that I can't do exactly what I want. Then when I came to Gotha, I became to study the very orthodox way, which was nice, but it was not that exciting.
Yes.
When I brought him the composition, it was exciting because there was very small and simple compositions, but he came and he started to discuss it, and I wrote my first piece. Was also humoresque, by the way, which was in contrast to Dvořák G-flat major and F-sharp major, and it's dedicated to Janacek, of course, and then he liked it very much, and then just at the very end he said, well, then here we should maybe do a little change, so he helped me with 1 or 2 bars. I'm very proud that I have few pieces with Janacek's touch. And you hear it. You hear it.
He was the great influence then of your early life.
Yes, in a way, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I would say
the humanity of the person.
Yes.
He felt all the vibrations around him of.
And also this enormous dedication, although the man who really had a terribly hard life all his life before he was recognized. He was living in complete obscurity in a way, and faced all kind of difficulties and tragedies.
If he had died early, we would not know his music.
And I mean, this enormous dedication to it, and this was a great example, for everybody.
Would you say that your life has been a hard life? You have been, from 5 years on, you've been working hard.
Yes, but I loved it.
Yes.
That's a great difference.
Why is Smetana's piano music not played?
That is a good question. I don't know. That really I don't know, because it's a very pianistic. It's beautiful music, but Smetana is in general not enough played. I think his opera should be much more played than they are, because the people claim they are naive. All right, so they are naive, and the librettos are naive, but so are many other operas which are naive. But the music is beautiful, and I think Dalibor is a great opera, which should be definitely in the repertory of the major scenes, and some of the small operas like the Two Widows or even the Kiss or the Secret are charming operas, which really should be played well.
Well, he's an immense composer. As a pianist, Mr. Firkušný, do you consider yourself predominantly a colorist or a draftsman? For instance, Sirkin is to me he draws. It's not color. Horowitz is a colorist.
I'm more a colorist.
Yes,
more a colorist. I mean, that's what I try. That's what I try.
When an Arthur Rubinstein played the piano, he almost seemed to have a philosophy of life that was joyous.
Joyous, exactly.
Can a recreative artist? Can you have a philosophy of life you're trying to get into your art on the overall sense? Is that possible?
It is possible sometimes when you play for yourself. Not so easy when you play for the public. And in my case, I speak of my... Arthur Rubinstein was a different story. You felt that it gave him a joy, to create it. But for me, I don't have always this feeling too.
For you, it's harder to bring it across?
It's a little bit hard, it needs more concentration and more thinking. But sometimes I play for myself, yes. I can really, as we say, enjoy it 100%, And
so for yourself is the best, for the audience is next, and then for records it's worst.
Yes, the record is difficult because if you make a recording, you want to do something you don't need to be ashamed of in a couple of years. On the other hand, as I told you before, I think each performance is slightly different, and sometimes you feel that it's too bad that you have to leave something which will be this way, which you may not like, let's say, 5 years or 6 or even months from that. But that's something which we have to... Therefore, I think the recording is you try to play correctly, to play so that, as I say, you don't need to be sorry for it. But sometimes maybe it's missing this certain thing which you make, even when you make mistakes, but you bring something which suddenly brings more life to the work.
Good. Is there music that you love, but it doesn't work for you when you play it?
Oh yes, definitely. But I don't play it. That's our advantage, that we have such an enormous repertory that we can be choosy.
But you like it, but in this case you can't.
I love many composers which I don't play. Because I have the feeling that, first of all, my hands are not suited to, let's say, to name specifically Scriabin. No, I have 2 small hands,
Your hands are small? They don't look small.
Yeah, they're small. And so there are certain things I'm limited by them. But I love this music, but I don't play it.
So do you regret having small hands, or do you think, oh...
I don't regret it. No, I think it has its disadvantages and advantages, I mean, you can manage. I mean, it's not... there are certain things which are easier to play when you have a large hand.
Why do you say it's small? Because of the breadth here, or the length of the fingers?
I can only take the stance with, and not always comfortably, That's about the maximum.
Is there a difference in your mind when you hear a woman pianist or a male pianist? That's just a myth, isn't it?
No. If then it's purely optical.
Yeah, it's purely optical.
Which sometimes I think plays a certain role, I mean, I love to see the woman pianist play Schumann concerto and Chopin concerto, and sometimes Brahms D minor doesn't fit so well with the feminine vision, without speaking of the playing.
Yes, without speaking of the
As I say, it's purely optical.
Yes. What are what's the few greatest thrills you've ever had in your musical life? Was it when you first played didn't you play the Dvorak with Beecham?
Yes.
That was the first time you ever played it?
No. I played it before in Prague.
With
Zell also. Well, the greatest thrill were, of course, not speaking of me, but when I heard really most memorable concerts in my life. For instance, when I heard for the first time Rachmaninoff, which was a tremendous kind of discovery of what piano can do, When I heard Horowitz, when I heard Schnabel, when I heard all these great masters, Serkin, Rubinstein, they were the great moment, because I was still living in Prague, relatively, we didn't have that much activity and possibility as we had.
So these were your
London. So they were great moments. Of course, then the conductors.
What did you say to yourself when you heard Rachmaninoff?
Oh, it was enormous impression. That was. I had great pianists before. He was not the very first one. I heard Sauer.
Tell me of Sauer. Oh, he was an immense figure in Vienna.
He was a wonderful pianist. He was the least pupil, as you know, and great elegance and great charm in his playing. I had Rosenthal, of course, who came there.
Friedman,
I had, was a great artist. So Rachmaninoff was not the very first pianist whom I heard from the big pianists, but his approach to the piano was completely different from what I heard before, because all these people were product of the Middle Europe, the Central Europe, mostly Leschetizky and Vienna school, yes. and Rachmaninoff, of course, came with the Russian school, and first of all, he was Rachmaninoff, he was such a strong personality as a artist that somehow everything was quite different what we had before. The same was more or less with Horowitz, when he came for the first time. When we had, it was like a revelation, that what can be achieved on the piano. So these were great moments. Personally, the great moments is every time when I have the feeling that I accomplished something which is at least a bit satisfying to myself. In making music, which is not
a bit satisfying, meaning you never get what you want.
One always tries to get. Maybe sometimes we try to get more than we can, but this is human. We are reaching for the untouchable. But there are moments sometimes that you have the feeling, well, today I really was in full harmony with what I was doing, and that I think is the great satisfaction. Or the great satisfaction is if I play with a truly great conductor, and...
Who are those? Who have they been? Bruno Walter?
Bruno Walter, Klemperer...
Was Beecham great conductor?
Beecham, and many I could...
Go on and on.
Kubelik, Talichin Prague was a very wonderful conductor. And especially when you play somehow the work which they call the war horse, which you play sometimes with small orchestras, and suddenly you feel that something's happening, and it gives you like an injection, you feel, gosh. So these are the great moments.
Yeah. Those are the great musical moments.
Yeah.
Now what about recreation? Are you a walker? Do you love to read great literature?
I like to read very much. I walk. I like to walk. I read. I listen to music.
You love food?
Yes, but I'm not a gourmet. I like food, but I'm not one of these who knows this is in this restaurant you have to take
you
this.
You don't cook or bite.
No.
Yeah.
I like music very much as a hobby. That means not only piano literature, but I like the operas, I like the symphony music, I like the chamber music, I like the songs. So everything what I can't do myself. I like to listen to. That's I very hardly listen to the pianist's recording, but very much to the operas and chamber music, and because that is something which I like, and I'm very happy that we have this opportunity to.
What about paintings?
Oh yes, painting.
Other arts.
I go to whenever I can. I go to every museum in the cities when I am playing, and to.
What is art in the life of man, really? Why did it happen? What does it shape mankind? Is it positive? Can it be negative? Some people have said that there's a backlash against culture now, that people don't want to know about it.
No, I think that it's simply if you have the feeling, and that's what I have. I simply can't do anything else. Mm-hmm. I wish I would be a banker. I would be a businessman.
Why do you wish that?
It would be a very comfortable life,
Very boring.
Because the artist's life is anything but comfortable in many ways, because we are always, in a way, struggling, if not in the materialistic.
You don't like planes either, do you?
I don't like the planes so much. And it's always a work. We are never ready, I mean, the good doctor can say, well, I finished my studies, now I have my praxis, now I know what I'm doing, and that's it. Although I'm sure that they are still trying to continue in the
getting better.
But artists never,
Mm-hmm.
There is no retirement unless something happens physically.
Mm-hmm.
There is no retirement age. We can play until we are 100 if we are physically able to do it.
Are you depressed after a concert if it doesn't come to what you wanted?
Oh yes, but I think this is normal.
Mm-hmm. You like people coming back and saying it's good to see you again? Or
yes, that's always pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
After all, we are trying, to please the audience. We are not milking the audience by, that I don't mean. I mean, since I remember, I never really played the pieces which I would know that audience would somehow eat. But still, I mean, we depend on the audience, and we have to try to give them some kind of satisfaction because they make the effort and came to the concert. So it's nice to them when the people come to see me.
Okay, that's fantastic. Do we have no more time?
That's it.
3 o'clock. You've given me a tremendous sum.
Well, I'm sure that you will be able to do something.